Thank you so much for coming in, Sharon. So the other day there was a statement by the Education Minister. Can you just tell me exactly what you're pushing for that is missing from her statement?
Okay. So we were just saying, so really what I think the Minister needs to take some responsibility here with the Education Department and have a clear directive to every school. If we've got consistency in road safety programs, we've got consistency in school enrolment. If we talk about a HSC, people love to talk about NAPLAN and some of the more, the bigger policy initiatives. The thing that matters most to children is to come to school and be safe. And when things go wrong for a child and their family, there needs to be consistency of policy, there needs to be transparency of a policy that's publicly available so people know what happens, how they deal with incidents of bullying, whether it's a small child in a primary school, but mainly the issues in a high school when young adolescents really need to have some structure around their relationships and their behaviours and when things go wrong. And the Minister can take a stand here and do something really proactive and positive and get a consistent policy in every school.
Yeah. And give me an example of when this would be most useful, this policy.
So you have an incident of bullying where a child's maybe just intimidated or frightened or feeling unsafe at school, and they may go and talk to a classroom teacher, they may talk to their parents, they may talk to a friend, or they may talk to no one. And what happens is they become more isolated and that bullying continues and they stay quiet and no one's addressing the bullying behaviour. People walk past, people flicking hats off heads or picking up bags, or children mucking around, and people don't pay any attention to what's going on in the isolation of that child because there's no policy in the school around behaviour, there's no policy when things blow up and escalate. You really need to be able to say that in our school, bullying no way, and some schools do, and in our school we won't tolerate those kind of behaviours, and that every child as they come into the school, particularly the new Year 7s coming in from lots of partner schools, that those children go, if you feel unsafe on any given day, you go to your year advisor, there's a teacher you can come and speak to a deputy here or head teacher welfare. You need to, like some schools do on orientation, and as the children arrive, here's how we manage if you feel unsafe, if there's a bullying incident. You also say to the children, if there's a scuffle in the playground, if you're caught doing these things, these are the ramifications for you and these are the processes that you go through. So right from day one, what won't be tolerated, the skylarking and the mucking around that actually does intimidate and frighten some other children, those behaviours are managed, and right up front in the playground as much as in the classroom, the school takes responsibility for behaviour, and those policies are not in every school and they're not consistent. That's what we're calling on the Minister to be able to address.
Great. And you would say that the template, this document, would be consistent, especially also to help teachers as well. Absolutely. Because you say they change schools a lot as well, so they don't want changing policy, they just want it to be exactly the same. If this happens, do X.
Exactly. And as a casual teacher might come into a school one day and do a week in a school while someone's off sick, that policy would be consistent for them. And the same as the curriculum and the teaching in the classroom would be, so they don't have to go, oh, in this school we do this, or in this school the process looks like that, or they take a whole term for a block because someone's on long service leave, or they just transition schools. You know, we have about 30% student mobility on the Central Coast, so because of the nature of families, housing and the new developments, there's lots of student movement. So as students move from one school to the next, not only do they have to settle and get a new group of peers, as the policies change or are not there for them, they don't have the same framework where they were safe in another school. Students who come to a school that's got a great framework and a policy go, well, no one ever told me we couldn't do that. That didn't happen in our old school. We were allowed to do this. And so you get this inconsistency all the time about expectations of behaviour, and we should have a consistent policy around bullying and what's expected of children in their relationships with each other and with teachers. I mean, teachers can be bullied as well.
Yeah, for sure. And other than the policy, is there anything else that you're pushing for?
I think that the issue around behaviours and behaviour management also stem from children and their interaction and reaction with each other. So while they struggle sometimes around relationships, some of the best work I've seen done is in primary schools where they've actually got activities in the lunch break and recess, and they teach children how to play together. It's surprising, but some children come from families where they're the only child, there's a couple of children, they don't have a lot of engagement in games and activities, and it's all a bit roughhouse and it's all about behaviours that we don't want to see in school. So teaching them to play games, take turns, be fair, use the resources, be out in the playground for activities and games, as well as be in the library and have games and activities run. Those schools have minimal behaviour issues. They teach the children how to socialise. They also recognise that not every child's going to be good at sport. Not everybody wants to be out there with an activity. They need quieter activities, but they need to learn to share and they need to learn to play well together. And primary schools, most of them do that really well. And what we need to see is high schools replicate the framework and the places, so you're not putting 1,000 students at lunchtime out in the playground and saying go fend for yourself, or find a little nook here, or the library's not open today, or there's no activities, or you can't use the sports equipment, or you can't come in the music room unless there's a teacher present. We need to make sure that teachers are available through recess and lunch so that students can have activities for them in the lunch breaks and the recess breaks, the same as they do at school time, because otherwise you're just pushing them out there looking to make mischief and they're left with nothing to do, a bit bored, and the next thing a scuffle breaks out and silly behaviour takes over. And you really need to take responsibility, I believe, for the recess and lunchtime breaks, but if you had a policy around bullying, that'd have to be implemented and overseen by teachers. That way it would keep all children safe and we wouldn't have the alienation of children, the non-attendance, and sadly some of the suicides that we've seen.
And to and from school is important as well.
To and from school is really important, and you know, the bus companies do a fairly amazing job when you consider the large number of students they have. And you know, and I know some outstanding schools who actually will walk the students down to the trains. They make sure they oversee how they line up. They pay attention every morning at the gates as they arrive at school, who's coming in, what's going on at the school, and they get to know those students. And as those students have a relationship with the deputies, the principals and those head teachers, even if they don't have them in the classroom, they have a sense of belonging and loyalty to the school, and so their behaviour changes. It's when they come into school all rough and ragged, when people are teaching who don't want to be there, when the culture and the environment in the school isn't a happy, safe place, the behaviours start to escalate down in the classroom and in the playground. But everything can change when the culture changes. And if people really invest in children and young people, you need to do it in the breaks and, as I say, in that recess and lunchtime, and make sure that their whole day is supervised and supported and in a framework so they're not just left to their own devices.
For sure. And just one thing that I've skipped before, but what policy is actually in place now for high schools?
In high schools now, there's mandatory that every school must have a bullying policy. So there should be some policy at some point put together, and hopefully with some of the really good strategies around positive behaviour for learning. Some of them might include a rock and water program that teaches young people how to deal with their emotions when things are a bit chaotic around them. They might have the very powerful Love Bites program running in their school, where they talk about respectful relationships with each other, with friends, with peers, with adults. That's a really powerful program, but not every school's running it. So this inconsistency of programs, because they're not in one consistent policy, if every school just for year 9 ran some programs, or in year 8 we ran rock and water, in year 10 we run these programs, you know, if there was consistency across the school for every student as they move schools, but also as a community, we would be reassured that every child's well-being is at the heart of what happens for them at school. And once they're happy and safe, the learning takes place.
For sure. And I'm sure there's plenty of them, but do you have just a quick few examples of schools, high schools that are doing it well?
Look, there's some amazing schools, and you know, it's always difficult to pick a school. I could sort of rattle off all 19 high schools and say there's something wonderful happening in every school, and there is. But where I feel they're doing some amazing things and running some of these better programs, you know, some of the things that are happening up in Lake Munmora, what they're doing around the Love Bites program, what they're doing at Narara and at Wadalba around youth and mental health programs, where they're bringing in counsellors and people to really talk to the whole year groups around specific programs. Some amazing things are happening. I think that the work that was done at Berkeley Vale, Tumby, and the entrance in that college campus to really transition children from 7 to 12 with their whole well-being, also recognising some of them in their Indigenous heritage and some of the work that's being done there. That's very powerful, and I think you'll find that the suspension and retention data for those schools is changing, with new leadership and new cultures in the schools making a big difference. You know, from a teaching and learning perspective and quality education, there's really good initiatives happening for Brisbane Water College. They've got a STEM program running down there, fully funded. And that's going to really engage students, but you know what? It's going to really engage teachers too. And the community will become really responsive, and that'll make a big difference about culture and learning and behaviour. Because once adults and children are engaged in what they're doing and happy in what they're doing, the behaviours slip by the way. It is that engagement that really makes a difference for them. But a framework and a policy that talks about acceptable behaviour, be it language, be it the written word or physical activity in the school, it's got to be consistent, because otherwise some schools will tolerate a bit of shove and push, and that can often lead to something much later and much worse, whereas other schools are really careful and really sensible, especially in a COVID space, but even before, going, your hands to yourself. Yeah. There is no touching, pushing, grabbing, poking, and it's not funny, and skylarking is not what's accepted in this school. And so people think that really restrains children, but what happens is they burn their energy up in other ways and other places. They look then for the framed activities that go on in the playground to burn their energy up, to express what they need to do in that sense of sportsmanship. And if schools don't have lunchtime and recess activities for them to burn it up, it's no wonder we see the incidents that we do. And we have these very large schools, as I've said, on constrained sites, some of them, and children really need an outlet, and we need to make sure that schools are doing that and the resources are in those schools. So there's great programs in a number of other schools, and so for those I've missed, I could come back and say some amazing things and talk about the behaviour schools and what they're doing at Hopetown and North Gosford and Glenvale for special needs children who've got some trauma in their life, who need special education settings. Those schools are awesome. We actually need more sites like that on the Central Coast, where they take young people who've had trauma in their life or who've got a special learning difficulty or disability, who just can't cope with the big mainstream school. They are so much better in the right setting, and there's a really big push to try and get in the north of the coast another setting like a Hopetown or like the North Gosford Learning Centre. And the Minister again could, just with a sweep of a pen and an investment in that community, get that resource where the children are that need it, and not just be focused on opening new buildings, which is wonderful, or expending money in the right political seat. You need to invest the money where the students are and the need is, and we're really seeing a lack of funding in the north of the Central Coast, and it really would really behoves the Premier and the Minister to have a big investment in what's happening in every school, to make sure those policies and those behaviours are consistent and no child slips through the cracks.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to Coast Community News.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Central Coast P&C is really pleased. Thank you.
You're welcome.